In this lecture, I'm going to introduce to you the dope sheet. The dope sheet tracks what animations are inserted at what frames. It allows us to move keyframes from one frame to another manually. We can also copy and paste keyframes across an animation using the dope sheet. So let's look at the dope sheet in Blender. To bring up the dope sheet, the ideal method would be to go to the animation output. So we're going to select animation from our default layouts, and we can see that we have our dope sheet up in the corner. Now, because we have no animations, the dope sheet summary is currently empty. So let's create some animations to see what this looks like. I'm going to begin by bringing my cube backwards, and I'm going to press I and insert location, rotation and scale. The reason why I'm inserting all three is because if I just locked rotation, or if I just locked location for example, and then I change the rotation later on and apply rotation then the rotation would in fact be automatically applied to the first keyframe as well, and that's not something that you would want. So it's better to lock all three to start with, just as a good habit. As we can see, now that we've inserted the keyframe, we now have a few extras. The object is now visible in our dope sheet because we have our first animation. We have an action associated with that object, and we have a detail of the actions that have been applied. So in this case, we've applied location, rotation and scale. We have a few extra options here. So we have the ability to modify via the F curve, which we're not going to do just yet. We have channels and we have keyframe locks. So we're going to leave all of these as default for the moment, and let's add another couple. So before you start moving about your cube, remember to change your frame first. That's the first thing you should do when you start creating your next keyframe. You should always be on that keyframe when you start editing. So I'm going to go to keyframe 30. Next, I'm going to bring my cube across the Y and across the X, and I'm going to rotate it along the Z by 30 degrees. Next, I'm going to press I, and I'm going to insert keyframe for location, rotation and scale. And we can now see that we have two keyframes. It looks on a dope sheet as if they're right next to each other, but that's because we're actually zoomed quite far out in terms of what we can see in terms of frames. So we're going to zoom in by scrolling down on the scroll wheel and then just scrolling down actually increases the value. Scrolling up decreases the value. In other words, it zooms in, and we can just see that a bit more space is appearing now. So let's zoom in a little bit more, and there we go, we've got quite a nice space. Now we're going to go on to frame 60, and I'm just going to move it forward and back across, rotate it again along the Z by 30 degrees, so it's quite a consistent animation. And always remember to insert the keyframe. And I'm going to do one more, so I'm going to zoom out a bit. I'm going to go to keyframe 90, enter, and I'm just going to bring this and rotate one more time 30 degrees and enter, and insert the keyframe. And there we go, we've got 4 keyframes here. So let's go back to the beginning and play our animation. So we can see it rotating, and there we go. So that's our animation. Using the dope sheet, we can begin editing this animation. By right clicking on a single keyframe, we can highlight that keyframe in yellow. Everything else turns white to indicate that it is not selected. Now we can click and drag this keyframe across all of our other frames and release to where we want. And make sure we left click. Now let's have a look at our animation. So we see a sharp jolt there because the two keyframes are so close together. That is just one example of the power of dope sheets, a great tool for manipulating how your cube or how your object, whatever it may be, can move in its animation. It's a great way of being able to speed up certain parts of your animation or slow down other parts. So, one more thing is the ability to copy and paste keyframes across an animation. So let's have a look at that. So we're going to take this we're going to take the starter keyframe, and we're going to go to key, and we can either copy or paste. We see we have shortcut keys as well, so we have Control C and Control V. Let's left click to copy the keyframe, and if we move to number 120, we're going to go to key and paste keyframe, and there we go. So let's see how this now looks. Play, and drags back. There we go, fantastic. So there we go, there's the dope sheet. Play around with it, see if you can do more complex animations with different objects. Maybe you could get a ball to start rolling across or bouncing on a surface. A couple of good ideas for you there, and I will see you in the next lecture.